breath tore through Madison's lungs like broken glass. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she looked back, she would see the yellow flash of his eyes in the shadows, and her legs would finally give out. Thump, thump, thump. Her bare feet slapped against the cold stone of the castle hallway. It was late. The corridors of the Moonstone pack house were empty, the torches flickering low, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like claws reaching for her. "You can't run forever, girl." A voice boomed from the darkness behind her. It wasn't a shout. It was a low, vibrating growl that shook the floorboards. It was Marcus, her father, or rather, the monster who claimed to be her father. Madison took a sharp left turn, her shoulder slamming into the rough stone wall. A cry of pain escaped her lips, but she swallowed it down. She scrambled toward the heavy oak doors of the main atrium. If she could just get outside, if she could just get to the woods. The heavy footsteps behind her sped up. He was hunting her. He was enjoying it. "You broke the rules, Madison," Marcus taunted, his voice getting closer. "Discipline is love. Why do you reject my love?" She burst through the double doors into the grand foyer. Moonlight spilled from the high glass ceiling, illuminating the grand staircase. She made for the exit, but a massive hand grabbed a handful of her hair. "No!" she screamed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Marcus jerked her back. She flew across the polished marble floor, crashing down hard. The world spun. She tasted copper in her mouth. Marcus stood over her. He wasn't shifting. Not yet. But his canines were extended, pushing against his lips. His eyes were burning with a sick, twisted pleasure. He raised a heavy leather strap. "Please," Madison whispered, scrambling backward on her elbows. "I didn't mean to drop it. It was an accident." "Perfection or punishment," Marcus recited, raising his arm. Madison squeezed her eyes shut, curling into a ball, waiting for the fire of the leather against her skin. But the blow never came. Instead, the air in the room suddenly changed. It became heavy, thick, and electric. It smelled of ozone, storm clouds, and pure, terrifying power. The pressure was so intense it made Madison's ears pop. "Marcus." The single word was spoken softly, but it carried more weight than a shout. It was a command that vibrated in the marrow of Madison's bones. Madison opened her eyes. Standing at the top of the grand staircase was a man she had seen only from a distance. He was massive, broad-shouldered, wearing a simple black shirt that strained against the muscles of his chest. His hair was dark as midnight, and his eyes were like molten silver. "Constantine, the Alpha King." Marcus froze. The strap fell from his hand, clattering loudly on the marble. He immediately dropped to his knees, baring his neck in submission. The smell of Marcus's fear, acrid and sour, suddenly filled the room, replacing his aggression. "Alpha King," Marcus stuttered, his forehead touching the floor. Constantine didn't look at Marcus. He descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, silent, and predatory. He moved like a panther stalking through tall grass. He stopped right in front of Madison. She couldn't breathe. She tried to scramble away, expecting him to be angry at the noise, at the disturbance. But Constantine dropped to one knee. He didn't care about the dirt on the floor. "Look at me," he ordered. His voice was deep, like gravel crunching under heavy tires. Madison trembled, lifting her chin. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, blinding her left eye. Constantine reached out. Madison flinched violently, shielding her face with her arms. The Alpha King froze. A low, dangerous rumble started deep in his chest, a sound that made the glass in the windows vibrate. He slowly lowered his hand, turning his palm up to show he held no weapon. "I am not him," Constantine said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper intended only for her. "I do not strike what is mine to protect." "Mine." The word hung in the air, confusing her. Constantine ignored her confusion. He reached out again, moving slower this time. His large, rough fingers brushed the hair away from her sticky, bleeding forehead. His touch was scorching hot, where skin met skin. A jolt of electricity shot through Madison, making her gasp. "What happened?" Constantine asked, his silver eyes scanning her face, noticing the old bruises on her arms, the terror in her scent. She fell. "My king." Marcus spoke up from the floor, his voice shaking. "Clumsy girl, I was trying to help her up. She is hysterical. She has always been unwell in the head." Constantine didn't look away from Madison. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with cold. He wiped a smear of blood from her cheek and brought it to his nose, inhaling sharply. His pupils blew wide. Swallowing the silver iris, the beast inside him surged forward. "Liar!" Constantine growled. He stood up in one fluid motion, turning to face Marcus. The air crackled. "Since when does helping someone up involve chasing them through my hallways like prey?" "My king, Silence." Constantine turned back to Madison. He didn't ask for permission. He bent down and scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing more than a feather. Madison stiffened, her hands instinctively clutching his shirt. She could feel the hard wall of his chest, the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her ear. He smelled of cedar, wood, rain, and something darker musk and dominance. It was intoxicating. It made her head spin. "Where are you taking me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Somewhere he cannot reach you." Constantine replied. He looked down at her, and for a second, the silver fire in his eyes softened into something resembling concern. "You are bleeding on my shirt, little wolf." "I'm sorry," she panicked, trying to pull away. "I'll ruin it." He tightened his grip, pulling her closer, pressing her wet, bloody cheek against his neck. "Let it bleed. It reminds me why I am about to destroy him." He strode toward the private wing of the castle, stepping right over Marcus, who was still cowering on the floor. "Guards!" Constantine barked without breaking his stride. Two massive warriors stepped out of the shadows. "Take Beta Marcus to the cells," Constantine ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. "If he speaks, gag him. If he resists, break his legs." As the guards dragged her screaming father away, Madison let her head fall against the Alpha King's shoulder. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted. The heat radiating from him was wrapping around her like a blanket. "Close your eyes," Constantine murmured into her hair, his lips brushing the top of her ear. "You're safe now." For the first time in her life, Madison believed it. And then, everything went black. Madison woke up to the smell of antiseptics and lavender. She blinked, her eyelids feeling heavy. She wasn't on the cold floor of the cellar. She wasn't in her small, drafty room. She was lying in a bed so soft it felt like a cloud. The sheets were high thread count cotton, cool against her skin. Panic flared in her chest. She sat up too quickly. "Easy, child, easy." A woman with kind eyes and graying hair stepped forward. It was Marin, the pack healer. Madison knew her. Though they had never spoken, Marcus had never allowed Madison to see a doctor. "Where am I?" Madison rasped. Her throat felt dry. "You are in the king's private guest quarters," Marin said gently, handing her a glass of water. "Drink. You lost a lot of blood last night." Madison took the glass with shaking hands. As the water cooled her throat, memories of the night before crashed into her. The chase, the atrium, Constantine. "He carried me." She looked down at herself. She was wearing a clean, oversized t-shirt that smelled faintly of that same cedar and rain scent. It was his shirt. The realization made heat flare in her cheeks. "He's outside, you know," Marin whispered with a knowing smile. "He hasn't left the door since he brought you in 6 hours ago, pacing like a caged tiger." Madison's heart skipped a beat. The Alpha King. He goes by Constantine to his friends. A deep voice came from the doorway. Madison jumped, clutching the sheet to her chest. Constantine stood leaning against the doorframe. He looked bigger than she remembered. He had changed his clothes. He now wore dark jeans and a fitted gray thermal that did nothing to hide the width of his shoulders. But he looked tired. There was a tension in his jaw, a restlessness in his hands. Marin bowed her head. I will give you a moment. Alpha, she needs rest, so keep the interrogation short. It's not an interrogation, Constantine grunted softly. Marin left, closing the door with a soft click. The silence that followed was thick with tension, but not the scary kind. It was a heavy, magnetic pull that made the air feel thin. Constantine pushed off the doorframe and walked toward the bed. He didn't sit on the chair. Instead, he sat on the edge of the mattress, his hip just inches from her leg. The mattress dipped under his weight, sliding her slightly closer to him. He stared at her, his gaze intense, tracing the bandage on her forehead. Does it hurt? He asked. His voice was a low rumble, intimate and rough. Only a little, Madison lied. Constantine let out a huff of breath that might have been a laugh. You are a terrible liar, Madison. He reached out. His large hand hovered over her cheek for a moment, asking for silent permission. When she didn't pull away, he cupped her face. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and dry. His thumb began to stroke her cheekbone in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Why? Madison whispered, leaning almost imperceptibly into his touch. Why did you help me? I'm just a beta's daughter. I'm defective. I can't even shift properly. Constantine's eyes darkened. The silver swirl in his irises sped up. He leaned in closer, encroaching on her personal space until she could feel his breath on her lips. Defective, he repeated the word with disdain. Is that what he told you? It's the truth. I'm weak. You survived 18 years in a house with a monster, Constantine murmured. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes. That isn't weakness, little wolf. That is endurance. He shifted his hand, sliding his fingers into the hair at the nape of her neck. His grip tightened just slightly possessive. Commanding, a jolt of electricity shot down her spine, settling low in her belly. It was a hot, aching sensation she had never felt before. You smell? Constantine trailed off. He leaned forward, burying his nose against the sensitive spot just below her ear. Madison gasped, her hands gripping his biceps to steady herself. The muscles under his shirt were hard as rock. You smell like honey and fear, he groaned against her skin, inhaling deeply. And something else, something specifically mine. Alpha, she breathed out, her head falling back, exposing her throat to him. It was an instinctual submission, but it felt like an invitation. He grazed his teeth lightly over her pulse point, making her body jerk. Tell me to stop, he growled, his voice vibrating against her jugular. Tell me to leave, Madison, and I will walk out that door. I don't want you to leave, she whispered. The truth slipped out before she could stop it. Constantine pulled back, just an inch, so he could look her in the eyes. His pupils were fully dilated now. Good, because I don't think I could walk away even if I wanted to. He moved his hand from her neck down to her arm, tracing the old, yellowing bruise just above her elbow. His touch changed instantly from hungry to incredibly gentle. I found your diary, he said quietly. The spell broke. Madison froze, ice replacing the fire in her veins. She tried to scramble back, but he held her arm not forcefully, but firmly. No, she whimpered. You read it? I had to know the truth, he said, his voice grim. I found it hidden in your mattress frame. It's just stupid thoughts, scribbles. It is evidence, Constantine corrected her. Detailed evidence of a decade of abuse and something else. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't from her diary. It looked official, old. "While you were sleeping, I went to the pack archives," he explained, watching her reaction closely. "I looked up your birth records, your medical history." He unfolded the paper. "There is a recurring order for supplements assigned to your household, delivered by a courier from the Grey Council." He paused, his jaw ticking. "It isn't medicine, Madison. It's concentrated wolf's bane mixed with inhibitors." Madison stared at him, her mind reeling. "Wolf's bane that kills us." "In large doses, yes. In small, controlled doses over a lifetime." Constantine's voice dropped to a terrifyingly low register. "It prevents the wolf from forming. It makes you weak. It causes pain. It makes you docile." He took her hand, intertwining his thick fingers with her slender ones. He squeezed tight, grounding her. "You aren't defective, Madison," he said fiercely. "You have been poisoned for years." Tears welled up in Madison's eyes. The shame she had carried her whole life, the feeling that she was broken, that she had failed. Her pack cracked open. "Why?" she sobbed, the first tear rolling down her cheek. "Why would they do that?" Constantine used his thumb to wipe the tear away, catching the moisture. "That is what I am going to find out, but I promise you this." He leaned in again, pressing his forehead against hers. The heat radiating from him was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "Whoever did this," he whispered, his lips brushing hers with every word, "whoever ordered this will burn. I will tear this pack apart stone by stone until I find them." He kissed the corner of her mouth softly, tentatively, promising pleasure and violence all at once. "You are under my protection now," he vowed, "and the king always keeps his treasures." Madison closed her eyes, breathing in his scent, and for the first time, the beast inside her, the one she thought was dead, stirred. It was weak, but it was there, and it recognized him. "Mate." The library was silent, save for the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. It was 3 a.m. Constantine didn't need light to see. His alpha vision cut through the gloom as he ran his fingers along the spine of an ancient leather-bound book. He wasn't looking for history. He was looking for a lie. He pulled the book, The Laws of the First Shift, and heard the distinct click of a mechanism releasing. The panel behind the bookshelf slid open with a groan of dry wood. "You thought you were clever," Constantine muttered to the empty room. Inside the hidden alcove sat a stack of files marked with the seal of the Grey Council. The council was supposed to be the moral compass of the pack, advisors, elders. Instead, what Constantine found made bile rise in his throat. He flipped open the top folder. His eyes scanned the documents rapidly. Subject offspring of Beta Marcus. Project code Silent Night. Objective suppression of pheromones to create undetectable scout. Constantine's grip tightened on the paper, crumpling the edge. They weren't just poisoning Madison because they hated her. They were trying to make her into a ghost, a weapon that could slip into enemy territory without being smelled or sensed. He turned the page, and then his heart stopped. At the bottom of a status report dated 3 years ago was a signature. It was flamboyant, sharp, and unmistakable. "Mikhail." Constantine felt the blood drain from his face. Mikhail, his beta, his best friend. The man who had stood back to back with him in the Great War. The man who poured his drinks and laughed at his table. "No," Constantine breathed, the denial tasting like ash on his tongue. He read the note above the signature. "The girl's resistance to the wolf's bane is higher than anticipated. Increased dosage. If she dies, she dies. But if she survives, we will own the shadows." A low, dangerous growl built in Constantine's chest, vibrating through his rib cage until it exploded into a roar that shook the books off the shelves. He slammed his fist into the solid oak desk. The wood splintered and cracked down the middle. He needed to kill something, right now. But before he could shift and tear the room apart, a faint scent hit his nose. It drifted from the hallway, through the heavy doors. Honey, fear, and a hint of fresh, medicinal herbs. Madison. The rage didn't vanish, but it focused. It turned cold and razor-sharp. He couldn't kill Mikhail yet. If he did, the rest of the rats in the council would scatter. He needed to be smart. Constantine straightened his shirt, smoothed his hair, and walked out of the library. He moved silently through the corridors until he reached her door. He didn't knock. He pushed it open gently. The room was dark. Marin had left a small nightlight burning in the corner. Madison was asleep, but it wasn't peaceful. She was tossing, her brow slick with sweat. The healing process had begun, and her body was fighting the years of toxins. Constantine walked to the bed. He sat down heavily, the mattress sinking under his weight. Madison gasped in her sleep, her hand flying out as if warding off a blow. "Shh," Constantine soothed. He caught her hand in midair. "I've got you." Madison's eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, unfocused. "Father," she whimpered. "No," Constantine said firmly. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles one by one. Not him, never him again. Madison blinked, focusing on his silver eyes. "Constantine, I'm here." She tried to sit up, but she was too weak. "You look angry." "I am," he admitted. He reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair away from her face. His touch was feather-light, contrasting with the violence simmering just beneath his skin. "But not at you, never at you." "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked softly. Constantine looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fragility of her bones, the unnatural pallor of her skin, and he saw the strength it took for her just to draw a breath. Mikhail looked at her and saw a lab rat. Constantine looked at her and saw a miracle. "I found a name," Constantine said, his voice grim. "Who?" "It doesn't matter yet." He lied. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. It would break her trust in the entire pack. What matters is that it stops tonight. He shifted, kicking off his boots. He laid down on top of the covers, next to her. He kept a respectful distance, but his arms stretched out above her head, creating a protective barrier. "What are you doing?" Madison whispered, her heart rate spiking on the monitor next to the bed. "Guarding what is mine," Constantine rumbled. He turned on his side, propping his head on his hand so he could watch her. "Go to sleep, Madison. If anyone tries to come through that door, they will have to go through me." Madison hesitated, then scooted mere inches closer. The heat of his body was a furnace against the chill of her fever. "Constantine." Thank you." He didn't answer. He just watched her until her breathing evened out, but in the darkness, his silver eyes remained wide open, burning with a promise of vengeance. The next 3 days were hell. Marin called it the purge. Constantine called it torture. Madison's body was rejecting the poison that had been part of her biology for a decade. She shook uncontrollably. She burned with fever so high that Constantine packed ice around her body himself. She screamed at invisible monsters. But through it all, Constantine didn't leave. He delegated his duties. He ignored the council meetings. He ignored Mikhail's requests for an audience. He stayed in the room. "It hurts," Madison sobbed, twisting in the sheets. "Make it stop, please, just kill me." "Look at me," Constantine commanded. He was sitting behind her on the bed, his back against the headboard, pulling her flushed body against his chest. He held her arms down gently so she wouldn't scratch herself. "You are fighting a war, little wolf. Don't surrender." "I can't," she gasped. "It burns." "I know," he whispered into her ear. "Focus on me. Focus on my voice." He lowered his head. Nuzzling the curve of her neck, he let a small amount of his alpha aura leak out, not to dominate, but to soothe. A low purr vibrated in his chest, resonating against her back. "Focus on the ice," he murmured. He took a wet, cool cloth and ran it down her throat, over her collarbones, and down the center of her chest. The sensation of the cold water and his hot, rough hands created a sensory overload that grounded her. "That feels good," she breathed, her head lolling back onto his shoulder. "You are doing so well." He praised her. He kissed her temple, tasting the salt of her sweat. So strong. Suddenly, Madison stiffened. Her eyes flew open, but she wasn't seeing the room. She was seeing the past. "No," she muttered. "Not the blue light. I don't want the blue light." Constantine froze. "What blue light?" "Madison." "The man," she rambled, caught in a fever dream. "Not father, the other one, the one with the cold hands. He writes things down. He checks my teeth." "Who is he?" Constantine urged gently. He smells like ink and peppermint," she whispered. Then she convulsed, a sob ripping through her. "He says I'm almost ready." Constantine held her tight until the seizure passed, rocking her back and forth. Ink and peppermint. He filed that information away. Mikhail didn't smell like peppermint. There was someone else, someone deeper in the shadows. Once Madison finally drifted into a deep, exhaustion-filled sleep, Constantine gently untangled himself from her limbs. He placed a kiss on her forehead and stood up. It was time to get answers. He marched down to the dungeons. The air here was damp and smelled of mold and despair. 2 guards stood at attention as he approached cell number 4. "Open it," Constantine ordered. The heavy iron door creaked open. Marcus was sitting on a cot, his head in his hands. He looked smaller without his arrogance. When he saw the Alpha King, he flinched. Constantine didn't shout. He walked in and closed the door behind him. The click of the lock was louder than a gunshot. "My daughter is screaming in her sleep," Constantine said conversationally. He walked around the small cell, inspecting the stone walls. "She is sweating out poison you fed her." "I had no choice." Marcus blubbered immediately. "They have leverage on me. Debts. Gambling debts." Constantine stopped. He turned slowly. "So, you sold your child for money." He moved so fast, he was a blur. 1 second, he was across the room. The next, he had Marcus pinned against the wall by his throat. Marcus's feet dangled a foot off the ground. "Who is they?" Constantine snarled, his canines extending. "Mikhail," Marcus wheezed, clawing at Constantine's arm uselessly. "It was Mikhail and the council. They said it was for the good of the pack. They said she was special." "And the man who smells like peppermint?" Constantine tightened his grip. "Who is he?" Marcus's eyes bulged. I don't know. I never met the scientist. I only dealt with Mikhail. Mikhail brought the orders. Mikhail brought the money." Constantine believed him. Marcus was too weak to hold on to a big secret. He was a pawn. He dropped Marcus. The beta crumbled to the floor, coughing and gasping for air. "You are pathetic," Constantine spat. "Please, Alpha," Marcus begged. "Don't kill me." Constantine looked down at the man. Killing him would be easy. It would be satisfying. But if Marcus died, Mikhail would know Constantine was on to him. Mikhail would cover his tracks. "Death is too easy for you," Constantine said coldly. "You are banished." Banished? Marcus looked horrified. For a wolf, being without a pack was a fate worse than death. It meant madness. "You leave tonight," Constantine ordered. "If I catch your scent within 100 miles of this territory, I will rip your heart out and feed it to the crows. Go." He turned and walked out, leaving the door open for the broken man to scuttle away into the night. When Constantine returned to the guest room, the sun was beginning to rise. Golden light flooded through the windows. Madison was awake. She was sitting up, looking pale but lucid. The fever had broken. She looked at him as he entered. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the darkness in his aura. "Where did you go?" she asked. Her voice was raspy. Constantine walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. He took her hand. It felt cool, healthy. "I handled a problem," he said. "My father, he is gone. Madison, he will never hurt you again." Madison looked down at their joined hands. "Did you kill him?" "No, I exiled him. He's nothing now." She was silent for a long time. Constantine waited, worried that she might be angry, that some misplaced loyalty might surface. Instead, she looked up at him, and her eyes were clear. "Why do you care so much? You're the king. You have a kingdom to run. Why are you sitting here wiping sweat off a broken girl?" Constantine reached out and cupped her jaw. The electricity sparked between them, instantly hot, undeniable, and magnetic. "Because," he murmured, leaning in until his lips were hovering just over hers, "I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who want my power, my title, or my protection. But when I hold you," the wolf inside me finally goes quiet. He brushed his thumb over her lower lip. "You aren't broken. Madison, you're just beginning to form." "I don't know who I am without the fear," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Then trust me," Constantine whispered, closing the gap. "Trust the wolf. We will find out together." He kissed her then. It wasn't a chaste kiss on the forehead. He captured her mouth, demanding and giving all at once. It tasted of hope, of dark promises, and of a war that was just beginning. And for the first time in her life, Madison didn't pull away. She melted. 2 months. It had been 60 days since the poison was purged from Madison's veins. 60 days of clean food, heavy training, and Constantine's burning gaze following her every move. But tonight, something was different. The moon hung heavy and full outside the castle windows, a giant white eye staring down at the world. The air inside the training room was thick with static. Madison fell to her knees, clutching her chest. "It's happening," she gasped. It didn't feel like a heartbeat. It felt like a claw scratching against the inside of her ribs. Desperate to get out, it was hot, molten hot. Constantine was at her side in a blur of motion. He didn't touch her, not yet. He hovered, his large hands shaking with restrained energy. "Breathe," he ordered, his voice tight. "Don't fight it. Let the walls come down." Marin, the healer, stood in the corner with a bucket of water and towels. Her face was pale. "Alpha, her vitals are spiking too high. Her bones haven't shifted in 18 years. They are rigid. This is going to break her." "She will not break," Constantine growled, though his sense spiked with terrified concern betrayed him. "She's forged from iron." Madison screamed. It was a guttural, raw sound that ripped through her throat. Her spine arched backward, an audible crack echoing off the stone walls. "Constantine!" she cried out, reaching blindly for him. He grabbed her hands, anchoring her. "I'm here. Look at me. Madison, look at me." She locked eyes with him. His silver irises were glowing, swirling like a storm. "It hurts," she sobbed. "I know," he murmured, his voice dropping to a rough velvet texture that vibrated through her bones. "Pain is the price of freedom. Pay it." Another crack. Her shoulder blade rearranged itself. The sound was sickening. Usually, a shift took seconds, a fluid ripple of magic. But Madison had been locked in a cage of poison for a decade. The lock was rusty. The key didn't turn easily. She collapsed forward, her forehead resting on Constantine's chest. He held her, absorbing her tremors. He didn't care that her nails were digging into his arms, drawing blood. "Give it to me," Constantine whispered fiercely against her hair. Give me your pain, little wolf. A wave of heat exploded from Madison's core. It was blinding. White light flooded the room, smelling of ozone and fresh snow. With a final bone-shattering crunch, Madison's human form dissolved. Constantine was pushed back by the force of the transformation. He landed on his feet, crouching low, a growl ready in his throat. Silence fell over the room. Slowly, unsteadily, a creature rose from the pile of shredded clothes. She was magnificent. She wasn't the russet brown of her father, nor the black of the Alpha line. She was silver. A pale, shimmering moonlight silver that looked almost white. She was sleek, smaller than a warrior wolf, but built for speed. Her eyes remained the same human and expressive, but now they were framed by pale fur. Marin gasped. I have never seen a coat like that, not in the history books. The silver wolf looked at her paws. She flexed her claws, scraping the stone floor. Scritch, scritch. She looked up at Constantine. She let out a small, unsure whine. Constantine didn't hesitate. He stripped off his shirt in one fluid motion, tossing it aside. Muscles rippled under his skin as he embraced his own beast. There was a sickening snap, a rush of black fur, and a massive midnight black wolf stood where the king had been. He was 3 times her size, a monster of shadow and muscle. The black wolf lowered his massive head. He nudged the silver wolf's nose gently. Run! His voice echoed in her mind. It wasn't a spoken word. It was a feeling, a pull. They bolted. They scrambled out of the castle doors and into the cool night air. Madison, the silver wolf, felt the wind in her fur for the first time. It was intoxicating. The smells of the forest exploded in her nosepine. Damp earth, rabbit, owl. She was fast, faster than she realized. She became a blur of silver light weaving through the trees. Constantine stayed right beside her. He could have outpaced her easily with his long stride, but he matched her speed. He flanked her, protecting her blind side. They reached a clearing bathed in moonlight. Madison stopped, panting, her tongue lolling out. She felt alive for the first time. She wasn't the broken girl in the cellar. She was a predator. She was power. Constantine circled her. He rubbed his flank against hers, a claim, a possessive, intimate gesture that made heat flare in her belly, even in wolf form. He nipped gently at her ear, playful and affectionate. Mine. The thought pushed into her head, heavy and dark. Suddenly, the black wolf froze. His ears swiveled toward the castle. A low, dangerous growl rumbled in his chest. Madison sensed it too, a new scent on the wind, bitter, calculated. Change back, Constantine commanded telepathically. We have a visitor. When they returned to the castle, wrapped in spare cloaks left by the guards, they found him waiting in the main hall. Mikhail. The beta was leaning against a pillar, swirling a glass of amber liquid. He looked relaxed, handsome in a sharp suit. But his eyes were shark-like as they scanned Madison. A silver wolf, Mikhail drawled, pushing off the pillar. The guards are whispering about a ghost in the woods. Madison stiffened. Constantine's arm tightened around her waist, pulling her into his side. It was a difficult shift, Constantine said, his voice flat, but successful. Mikhail took a step closer, inhaling deeply. He was searching for weakness. He was searching for the effects of the wolf's bane. She looks remarkably healthy, Mikhail noted, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. I heard screams. I assumed the worst. You assumed wrong, Madison spoke up. Her voice was raspy from the screaming, but it didn't shake. She looked Mikhail dead in the eye. For a second, she saw a flash of something in his expression, not anger, but recognition and maybe fear. I am stronger than people think, she added. Mikhail's smile didn't reach his eyes. Clearly, the pack will be eager to see their new guest. Not guest, Constantine corrected. Mate. The glass in Mikhail's hand cracked. A single hairline fracture appeared in the crystal. Is that official? Alpha, Mikhail asked softly. Have you marked her? Soon, Constantine promised, his aura flaring up to push Mikhail back. Now, leave us. My mate is tired. Mikhail bowed, but his eyes lingered on Madison for a second too long. Sleep well. Little miracle. The game is just beginning. As he walked away, Madison shivered. He knows, she whispered to Constantine. He knows I shouldn't have survived. Constantine kissed the top of her head. He knows nothing, but he is afraid. And fear makes men make mistakes. The basement of the tavern was thick with cigar smoke and treason. Mikhail sat at a round wooden table. He wasn't alone. 3 members of the Grey Council sat opposite him. Their robes were pristine, their faces hidden in shadow. She shifted, Mikhail said, slamming his hand on the table. She wasn't supposed to shift. The dosage should have fried her neural pathways. The girl is an anomaly, one of the counselors hissed. Or perhaps the king's healer is better than we anticipated. It doesn't matter, Mikhail snapped. Constantine is infatuated. He called her mate. If she becomes Luna, we lose access to her. We can't experiment on a queen. Then we accelerate the timeline. The counselor replied, we need a distraction, something big enough to pull Constantine away from the castle, something that leaves her unguarded. Mikhail smiled, a cold, cruel twisting of lips. I have already reached out to our neighbor. Ragnar, the counselor sounded nervous. Alpha Ragnar is a butcher. He is unstable. Exactly, Mikhail said. Ragnar has wanted Constantine's territory for years. I simply opened a door for him. I gave him the patrol schedules. I told him the king is distracted by a new lover. Mikhail leaned back, lighting a cigarette. The flame illuminated his hollow cheeks. When Ragnar attacks, Constantine will ride out to war, and while he is playing hero, we will take the girl back to the lab, and this time, we won't worry about keeping her alive. 2 days later, the sun beat down on the training grounds. Again, Constantine barked. Madison was panting, sweat dripping down her nose. She wiped it away with the back of her hand and dropped into a defensive stance. I'm tired, Constantine, she complained, though she was smiling. Enemies don't care if you are tired, he retorted. Though his eyes were warm, he circled her, shirtless, his skin glistening. Ragnar's wolves are brutal. They don't aim to pin you, they aim to maim. Show me how you stop them. He lunged. It was a feint. He pulled his punch at the last second, aiming for her ribs. But Madison moved before he did. She didn't just dodge, she ducked left, spun, and swept her leg under his, using his own momentum against him. Constantine hit the dirt with a heavy thud. Silence fell over the training ring. The gathered guards stared in shock. No one put the Alpha King on his back. Constantine stared up at the sky for a second, blinking. Then, a low, rumbling laugh erupted from his chest. He sat up, brushing dirt off his shoulder. How did you do that? He asked, looking at her with new intensity. I signaled a right hook. Madison frowned, looking at her hands. I don't know. I didn't look at your fists. I felt it. Constantine stood up and walked over to her. He grabbed her wrist, not roughly, but urgently. Explain. It was like a shadow. She struggled to find the words. Before you moved, I felt a spike in the air, like a distinct color, red for aggression. It pushed to the left, so I went left. Constantine's expression darkened. He looked toward the castle, where Marin was watching from a balcony. The experiments, he murmured. They were trying to create a silent scout, someone who could sense intent without seeing it. Is that bad? Madison asked, fear creeping into her voice. Am I a freak? No, Constantine said fiercely. He pulled her into a crushing hug, lifting her feet off the ground. You are a weapon. Madison. A weapon they forged to use against me. But now you belong to yourself. He set her down but didn't let go. His hands rested on her hips. They were in public, in front of his soldiers, but he didn't care. You have an advantage, he whispered. Hone it. Use it. Suddenly, Madison stiffened in his arms. Her head snapped toward the castle gates. What is it? Constantine demanded, instantly alert. Cold, Madison whispered, her eyes wide. I feel ice and purple. It's suffocating. A moment later, the gates opened. A black limousine drove in. The flag on the hood bore the crest of the neighboring pack, but the car belonged to Mikhail. Mikhail stepped out. He adjusted his cuffs and smiled at the couple training in the dirt. You feel him? Constantine asked quietly. I feel him, Madison replied. Her heart hammered against her ribs. But Constantine, it feels familiar. How? In my nightmares, she confessed, clutching Constantine's arm. When the fever was high, I felt this exact sensation. The ice, the suffocation. Mikhail was there. He was in the room when they hurt me. Constantine's jaw locked. The veins in his neck bulged. Stay behind me, he ordered. He marched toward the car. Mikhail met him halfway. Alpha, Mikhail greeted smoothly. I bring news. Border Patrol reports movement in the west, Ragnar's scouts. How convenient, Constantine snarled. He stepped into Mikhail's personal space, using his height to tower over the beta. Ragnar has been quiet for 5 years. Suddenly, he wakes up. Mikhail didn't flinch. He was a good liar. Perhaps he smells weakness or distraction. He flicked his eyes toward Madison. Constantine grabbed Mikhail by the lapels of his expensive suit and slammed him against the side of the limousine. The metal dented. Careful, Mikhail, Constantine whispered, his voice lethal. My mate has a unique talent. She can smell lies. She can feel intent. Mikhail's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. His pulse jumped. Madison could hear it from 10 feet away. Thump, thump. I am only serving the pack, Constantine, Mikhail choked out. Serve this. Constantine shoved him away. Tell the generals to prepare. If Ragnar wants a war, I will give him a massacre. But you? He pointed a finger at Mikhail's chest. You stay here, where I can see you. That night, the castle was silent, preparing for the coming conflict. Madison lay in Constantine's massive bed, wrapped in silk sheets, but she couldn't sleep. The feeling of ice and purple was still lingering in her mind. Constantine came out of the bathroom, water dripping from his dark hair. He wore only sweatpants, hanging low on his hips. The scars of past battles crisscrossed his chest, shining silver in the moonlight. He climbed into bed and pulled her against him. His skin was hot, a stark contrast to the cold fear in her gut. You are thinking too loud, he murmured into her neck. I'm scared, she admitted. She traced the scar over his heart. If we go to war, what if they take me? What if they put me back in the box? Constantine flipped her over, hovering above her. His forearms bracketed her head. His face was deadly serious. They will have to kill every wolf in this kingdom to get to you, he vowed. Mikhail isn't the only one, she whispered. I felt echoes. When I looked at him today, I felt a string attached to him, pulling him. A string. Like a puppet, she said. He's terrified. Constantine, he isn't the master. He's just another dog on a leash. Constantine kissed her deeply, tasting her fear and swallowing it. Then we find the hand holding the leash. He growled against her lips, and we cut it off. He moved his hand down her body, his touch heavy and possessing. But for tonight, he breathed, no more talking about wars. Tonight, you are just a woman, and I am just a man. "Show me," she challenged breathlessly. And he did. The great hall of the pack house was packed. Hundreds of wolves stood shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with the scent of sweat, curiosity, and skepticism. They were here for the trials. In the old laws, a common wolf could not become Luna simply by marriage. She had to earn it. She had to prove she could lead, protect, and forgive. 3 trials: mind, strength, heart. Madison stood on the raised dais next to Constantine's throne. She wore a simple white dress that made her look ethereal against the dark stone, but her hands were trembling. "They are waiting for you to fail," Constantine murmured. He sat on his throne, looking every bit the predator king, his hand resting heavily on the armrest. He didn't look at her, but his boot touched the hem of her dress, a silent connection. "I know," Madison whispered back. Mikhail stood in the front row, arms crossed, his face a mask of polite interest, but Madison could feel the purple ice radiating off him, smugness mixed with anxiety. "Bring in the petitioners," the herald shouted. The first trial was a test of wisdom, resolving a conflict without clause. 2 men walked in. They were older, grizzled, smelling of soil and anger. One was tall and lanky, Elder Joran. The other was short and stout, Elder Kale. They had been fighting over a strip of fertile land between their farms for 20 years. Blood had been spilled. "It is my land," Joran shouted, pointing a shaking finger. "My grandfather planted the oak tree that marks the border." "Liar," Kale roared back. "The stream is the border. The tree is on my side of the water." They turned to Constantine, but the king remained silent. He gestured to Madison. "My intended will, Judge," Constantine announced. The room gasped. It was unheard of for an unmated she-wolf to judge elders. Madison stepped forward. The murmurs grew louder. "She's just a child. She's broken. What does she know?" She took a deep breath, pushing her unique sensory awareness outward. She didn't listen to their words. She listened to their heartbeats. She tasted their intent. She walked down the steps until she stood right between the 2 angry men. "Elder Joran," she said softly, "you claim the oak tree." "Yes," Joran puffed up his chest. "It is my heritage." Madison closed her eyes. She felt sadness. Deep, cloying blue sadness coming from him. Not greed. "And Elder Kale," she turned to the other man, "you claim the stream." "It waters my crops," Kale insisted, but from him, she felt exhaustion. Gray, heavy exhaustion. Madison opened her eyes. "You are both lying." The room went dead silent. "The land isn't what you are fighting about," Madison stated, her voice gaining strength. "Joran, your son died near that oak tree during the last raid. You don't want the land for farming. You want it for a shrine." Joran's face crumbled. The anger vanished, replaced by shock. How did you?" Madison turned to Kale. "And you aren't greedy. Your wife is sick. The herbs that grow by the stream are the only thing that eases her pain. You need access." Kale looked down at his boots, ashamed. "The trial is for a solution," Mikhail interrupted from the front row, his voice sharp. "Not a therapy session." Madison ignored him. She looked at the 2 men. "This isn't a border dispute," she declared. "It is shared grief." She turned to the crowd. "My ruling is this. The fence comes down. The land becomes common ground. Joran builds his shrine. Kale gathers his herbs, and both families will maintain it together in honor of what they have lost." She waited. Elder Joran looked at Elder Kale. For the first time in 2 decades, the hatred was gone. Joran nodded slowly. I accept." "I accept," Kale whispered. A cheer erupted from the back of the hall. It started small, then grew. The pack was impressed. She hadn't used force. She had used sight. Madison looked back at the throne. Constantine was smiling a small, rare smile that made his eyes crinkle. Pride rolled off him in waves of warm gold. But as Madison scanned the crowd, her gaze landed on Mikhail again. The purple smugness was gone, replaced by a sharp, jagged spike of black fear. "Why are you scared?" she thought, narrowing her eyes. "I just proved I'm a good leader. Unless my success ruins your plan." She focused harder on Mikhail. She pushed her senses past his surface emotions, diving deeper. It was like wading through sludge. And there, hidden beneath the fear, was a thin, silvery thread. It stretched away from him, leading out of the hall, leading nowhere. A puppet string, she realized with a chill. He isn't afraid of me. He's afraid of the person holding the string. She met Constantine's eyes. He saw her stiffen. He gave a subtle nod. "We see him." The second trial was 3 days later. Strength. Usually, this involved the candidate fighting the pack's strongest warrior, but Constantine had refused. "I will not have my mate beaten for sport," he had growled at the council. So the council, urged by a whispering Mikhail, had chosen a different test, a hunt. "A child is missing," Mikhail announced gravely to the assembled warriors in the courtyard. "Little Timmy. He wandered into the blind forest yesterday. The scents are cold. The terrain is treacherous." He turned to Madison, who was dressed in leather tracking gear. "If you wish to be Luna, you must protect the weak." Mikhail said with a sneer disguised as concern, "Find the boy. Bring him home before sundown. If you fail, well, the forest takes what it wants." "I will go with her." Constantine stepped forward, his hand reaching for his sword. "No," the high priestess intervened. "The trial must be faced alone." Constantine looked ready to murder the priestess, but Madison placed a hand on his chest. "I can do this," she said. She could feel his fear. It was a storm of jagged gray lightning. "Trust me." She shifted. The silver wolf exploded into being, shimmering in the morning light. She didn't wait for permission. She turned and bolted into the trees. The blind forest earned its name because the canopy was so thick it blocked out the sun. It was perpetually twilight. The ground was a maze of thorns and ravines. Madison ran, nose to the ground. She found Timmy's scent quickly milk, dirt, and bubble gum. But underneath it, there was something else. Wolfsbane. Someone had baited the trail. She slowed down, her hackles rising. This wasn't an accident. Timmy hadn't wandered off. He had been lured. She followed the scent trail deeper into the woods, moving silently. Her enhanced senses, the result of the experiments, painted a map in her mind. She could feel the heat signatures of squirrels in the trees. She could hear the heartbeat of a deer a mile away. And then she felt them. 5 of them, hiding in the brush up ahead. Their intent was burning bright red. Aggression. Murder. They weren't pack wolves. They smelled of sulfur and foreign soil. Ragnar's scouts. Mikhail had set a trap. He knew she would come for the boy. Madison crept forward. She saw Timmy. The boy was tied to a tree, gagged, eyes wide with terror. 5 rogue wolves circled him in human form, laughing quietly. "Think the little silver bitch will come?" one of them asked, sharpening a knife. "Boss says she has to," another grunted, "or she fails the test. Either way, we grab her. The scientist pays double for live delivery." The scientist? Madison's blood ran cold. That was the name from her fever dreams. She had 2 choices: run back and get Constantine, risking the boy, or fight. 5 against 1. Madison looked at Timmy. He was crying silently. The choice wasn't a choice at all. She didn't growl. She didn't bark. She launched herself from the shadows like a silver bullet. She hit the first rogue in the throat before he even knew she was there. His neck snapped with a sickening crunch. He fell. Chaos erupted. "She's here, shift," the leader screamed. The remaining 4 rogues shifted into large, mangy brown wolves. They were heavy, scarred fighters. Madison was small, lithe. But she had something they didn't. She could feel their moves before they made them. The wolf on her left tensed his hind legs. He's going to jump. Madison dropped flat to the ground. The wolf sailed over her head, exposing his soft belly. She slashed upward with her claws, gutting him in midair. 2 down. The 3rd wolf bit her flank. Pain exploded in her hip, hot and searing. Madison yelped but spun around, snapping her jaws shut on his ear, tearing it clean off. He retreated, whining. But the leader, the biggest one, slammed into her side like a freight train. Madison flew through the air and hit an oak tree. The impact knocked the breath out of her lungs. Ribs cracked. She landed in the dirt, wheezing. The leader loomed over her, drool dripping from his jaws. His intent was pure black death. "Get up!" a voice roared in her head. It wasn't Constantine. It was her own wolf. The beast that had been suppressed, poisoned, and tortured for 18 years. It was furious. Madison's eyes glowed blinding white. She didn't just stand up. She surged. She dove under the leader's guard, clamped her jaws onto his front leg, and twisted, bone shattered. The leader howled. She didn't stop. She fought like a whirlwind of silver fur and teeth. She was brutal, efficient, terrifying. Within minutes, the remaining rogues were either dead or fleeing into the deep woods. Madison stood over the carnage, chest heaving, blood dripping from her silver coat. It wasn't her blood. She shifted back to human form, uncaring of her nakedness. She scrambled over to the tree and untied Timmy. "Are you okay?" she gasped, her hands shaking as she pulled the gag off. Timmy threw his arms around her neck, burying his face in her shoulder. You killed the monsters." "Yes," Madison whispered, smoothing his hair. She looked at the dead rogues. "I did." She felt a thrumming in the air. She looked up. Constantine was standing at the edge of the clearing. He had broken the rules. He had followed her. He was staring at the bodies. Then he looked at her. He wasn't angry. He was awestruck. He took off his cloak and walked over, wrapping it around her and the boy. He pulled her into his chest, burying his nose in her bloody hair. "I told you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You are a weapon." "They mentioned him," Madison mumbled against his chest, the adrenaline fading, leaving her legs weak. "The rogues. They said the scientist pays for live delivery." Constantine stiffened. His arms tightened around her, bordering on painful. "We are going home," he stated, his voice turning to ice. "And then I am going to have a very long, very painful conversation with Mikhail." The final trial was not announced with trumpets. It was announced with silence. Constantine came to Madison's room as the sun was setting. He was dressed in ceremonial black, his face unreadable, but his scent gave him away. It smelled like burnt sugar and sorrow. "Tonight is the trial of the heart," he told her. Standing by the window, "It is the hardest one." Madison stood up from her vanity. She was wearing a gown of deep crimson, the color of blood, the color of royalty. "What do I have to do? Another rescue, another negotiation." Constantine turned. He walked over to her and took her hands. His grip was tight, almost painful. "Justice," he said. "The pact demands to see if their future Luna has the stomach to deal with those who have wronged her, to rule. You must be able to punish." "Who am I judging?" Madison asked, though a cold pit formed in her stomach. She already knew. "Your father," Constantine whispered. "Marcus has been dragged back from the border." Madison's breath hitched. "You banished him." "The council overruled me," Constantine growled, his eyes flashing dangerously. "They invoked the old laws. They say a traitor must be judged by the one he betrayed. They want to see you kill him, Madison. They want a show." The great hall was dimly lit by torches. The atmosphere was heavy, suffocating. In the center of the room, kneeling on the stone floor, was Marcus. He looked wretched. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt. He smelled of old sweat and terror. When Madison stepped onto the dais, he flinched as if struck. Mikhail stood to the side, watching with that same shark-like intensity. He wanted Madison to kill Marcus. If Marcus died, he took his secrets to the grave. "The accused is Marcus," the high priestess intoned, "charged with abuse of a pack member, treason, and conspiracy. The penalty is death." She handed Madison a heavy, obsidian dagger. The hilt was cold in her palm. "Do your duty, Luna," the priestess whispered. Madison walked down the steps. The crowd held its breath. The only sound was the crackling of the torches. She stopped in front of Marcus. He looked up at her. His eyes were watery, yellow, and pathetic. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a weak, broken man. "Please," Marcus whimpered. "Maddie, I'm your father." "You were my jailer," Madison corrected him, her voice echoing in the silent hall. She raised the dagger. The crowd leaned forward. Mikhail's lips twitched into a small smile. But Madison didn't strike. Instead, she closed her eyes. She opened her senses. She pushed past the smell of Marcus's fear and looked at his intent. It was gray, muddy, confused, swirling gray. There was no malice left in him, only cowardice. But deeper, she felt something else, a memory. Golden coins being exchanged in the dark, a hand wearing a signet ring, not Mikhail's ring, a voice saying, "Break her until she is nothing." Madison lowered the dagger. "Look at me," she commanded. Marcus looked up. "Did you hate me?" she asked softly, "or were you just paid to hate me?" Marcus froze. His gaze darted to the side toward Mikhail, and then past him, toward the shadowed alcoves where the council members stood. I, Marcus stammered. "I just wanted to be rich. They promised me power. They said it was a scientific study, that you were special." "Who is they?" Madison pressed, bringing the tip of the dagger to his throat. "I don't know," Marcus cried out, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face. "Mikhail brought the money. But the orders came on paper stamped with a black sun." A black sun. A gasp went through the room. That wasn't a pack symbol. That was a symbol from the dark ages of wolf history. Madison pulled the dagger back. "He is a pawn," she announced to the room. Her voice was clear, ringing with authority. "Killing him achieves nothing but silencing a witness." She turned to the high priestess and handed back the dagger. "I choose mercy," Madison declared, "not for him, but for us. We do not kill the weak. We banish them. Permanently." "You show weakness," a voice shouted from the back. It was one of Mikhail's loyalists. "No." Constantine's voice boomed from the throne. He stood up, his aura flooding the room, bringing everyone to their knees. "She shows control. A rabid dog kills because it can. A queen kills only when she must." Constantine walked down the steps and stood beside Madison. He took her hand and raised it high. "The third trial is past," he roared. "Behold your Luna." The crowd erupted. It wasn't polite applause this time. It was a roar of approval. They respected strength. Yes, but they loved justice. As the guards dragged a weeping Marcus away, Madison looked at Mikhail. He looked pale. He looked sick. And for the first time, Madison realized something crucial. Mikhail wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the shadows in the upper balcony, his eyes filled with absolute terror. Who is up there, Madison wondered. But before she could look, Constantine pulled her into his arms. He kissed her fiercely. Right there in front of the pack, his lips were hot, demanding, branding her as his. "You are magnificent," he groaned against her mouth. "I have never wanted you more than I do right now." Madison melted against him, the adrenaline crashing into desire. "Take me to bed, Alpha." "With pleasure," he growled. The castle was transformed. White roses draped every banister, gold banners hung from the rafters. The mating ceremony, the official bonding of the Alpha and Luna, was set for tomorrow. It was supposed to be a day of joy, but the air felt tight, like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. Madison stood in the library, staring out the window at the dark forest. It was raining. "You should be resting," a creaky voice said. It was Eleanor, the old head maid. She was carrying a tray of tea. Eleanor had served in the castle since Constantine's father was king. She knew every secret in the walls. "I can't sleep," Madison admitted. "I feel buzzing, like bees under my skin." Eleanor set the tea down. She looked around to make sure they were alone. Then, she stepped close to Madison. "Trust your skin, child," Eleanor whispered. Her old hands trembled. "The castle has been too quiet. The rats are hiding. That means the snake is hungry." "Eleanor," Madison frowned. "Do you know something?" "I know that Mikhail is a fool," Eleanor hissed. "But he isn't the one you should watch. Watch the ones who smile too much. Watch the ones who stand in the king's shadow." Before Madison could ask more, the door banged open. Marin rushed in, her face flushed. "Luna, you need to come. The perimeter alarms are silent, but the Western Guard post just missed its check-in." Madison's heart stopped. The Western post. That was the weak point in the wall. Ice, purple, suffocation. The sensation hit her so hard she staggered back against the desk. It wasn't a vague feeling this time. It was a scream in her mind. "They're here!" Madison gasped, clutching her chest. "Not tomorrow. Now!" Boom! The explosion rocked the foundation of the castle. Glass shattered in the window frames. Somewhere in the distance, a war horn blew, a guttural, barbaric sound. Ragnar. Madison didn't wait. She grabbed a sword from the decorative display on the wall. Constantine had insisted she learn to use steel as well as claws. She ran into the hallway. It was chaos. Guards were sprinting, shifting into wolves mid-stride. Smoke billowed from the west wing. She found Constantine in the war room. He was already fully armored, barking orders at his generals. When he saw her, his face paled. "Go to the safe room, Sao!" he roared at her. "Now!" "No!" Madison shouted back. She ran to him, grabbing his breastplate. The alarm didn't go off. Constantine. The perimeter was disabled from the inside. Constantine froze. "That's impossible. Only 5 people have the codes." "Then one of them is a traitor," Madison said breathlessly. "And if I go to the safe room, they might be waiting for me there." Constantine cursed in the old tongue. He grabbed her face, staring into her eyes. "Stay with me. Do not leave my sight. We fight together." They ran out into the courtyard. It was a massacre. Ragnar's wolves massive. Gray brutes were pouring through a hole in the wall. They were tearing into the pack guards. Constantine shifted. The midnight wolf appeared, a terrifying engine of destruction. He leaped into the fray, tearing throats out with lethal efficiency. Madison shifted too. The silver wolf was smaller, but she was faster. She weaved through the battlefield like a ghost. She hamstrung a massive brute who was aiming for Constantine's blind side. She was everywhere at once, sensing the attacks before they happened. Left, she signaled to Constantine. He dodged a spear thrust without looking, trusting her implicitly, and ripped the attacker's arm off. They were winning. Together. They were an unstoppable force. Ragnar's wolves were falling back, confused by the coordination of the Alpha and Luna. But then, Madison felt it. A sharp stabbing pain of betrayal. It came from the castle ramparts. She looked up. Standing on the wall, aiming a high-powered crossbow directly at Constantine's back, was Stepan. Stepan, Constantine's oldest friend, the captain of the guard, the man who had taught Madison how to hold a knife just last week. No, Madison screamed in her mind. She couldn't reach Constantine in time. She was too far away. She did the only thing she could. She shifted back to human form mid-run, grabbed a discarded spear from the mud, and hurled it with all her strength toward the ramparts. She wasn't strong enough to kill him from here, but she was accurate. The spear hit the stone right next to Stepan's head, sparking loudly. Stepan flinched. The crossbow bolt went wide, burying itself in the dirt inches from Constantine's paw. Constantine spun around. He saw the bolt. He looked up. He saw Stepan reloading. The midnight wolf let out a roar of pure heartbreak and rage. Constantine shifted back to human form. He was naked, covered in blood and terrifying. "Bring him to me!" Constantine screamed at his loyal guards. Alive! Ragnar's forces, seeing the tide turn and the element of surprise lost, sounded the retreat. They fled back into the night, leaving their dead behind. 10 minutes later, the courtyard was silent except for the heavy breathing of the warriors. 2 guards dragged Stepan into the mud before the king. Stepan didn't struggle. He looked defeated. Constantine stood over him, chest heaving. "Why?" he asked. His voice was broken. "You held my father's sword. You held my son, if I had one." Stepan looked up. He was crying. "I had to. Alpha, they have my mate. They took her 3 days ago." "Who?" Constantine demanded, grabbing Stepan by the throat. "Who took her, Mikhail?" "No," Stepan choked out. "Not Mikhail. Mikhail is just the money." "Then who?" Stepan's eyes darted to the crowd of onlookers. He looked terrified. "I can't say his name. If I say his name, they kill her." Madison walked forward. She was muddy, bloody, and shivering. She placed a hand on Constantine's arm. "He isn't looking at Mikhail," Madison whispered to Constantine. "He's looking at the balcony." Constantine looked up. The balcony was empty now, but moments ago, the entire inner circle had been standing there watching the battle. "Stepan," Madison said softly, kneeling in the mud. "Look at me." Stepan looked at the Luna. "Was it a man with a limp?" Madison asked, trusting a sudden flash of intuition, a memory from her fever of a rhythmic clicking sound. Click, drag, click. Stepan's eyes went wide. "How do you, He didn't finish. Suddenly, Stepan gasped. He clutched his chest. Foam bubbled at his lips. His eyes rolled back in his head. "Poison!" Marin shouted, rushing forward. "He's been dosed with nightshade. It was a timed capsule." Stepan convulsed once, violently, and then went still. "Dead!" Constantine roared, punching the muddy ground until the earth cracked. He had lost a friend, found a traitor, and lost the lead, all in 1 hour. Madison stood up slowly. She looked at the high balcony of the castle. "Constantine," she said, her voice cold and steady, "the enemy is not at the gate. The enemy is sleeping in the next room." Constantine stood up. He wiped the mud from his face. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Seal the castle," he ordered his remaining generals. "No one leaves, no one enters." He turned to Madison and pulled her against his blood-streaked chest. "Tomorrow is our wedding," he whispered into her hair, "and I'm going to marry you with a sword in my hand." "Good," Madison replied, resting her head on his shoulder, "because I intend to use mine." The morning of the mating ceremony dawned gray and heavy. There was no sunlight, only a thick fog that wrapped around the castle like a shroud. Inside, the mood was tense. Guards lined every hallway, their hands resting on their weapons. The servants moved silently, eyes cast down. The scent of death from the courtyard battle still lingered in the air, barely masked by the smell of the white roses. Madison stood in her chambers. Marin was fastening the final pearl button on the back of her wedding dress. It was a stunning gown, white lace that hugged her curves, with a long train that looked like spilled milk, but underneath the silk, Madison had strapped a thin silver dagger to her thigh. "You are trembling," Marin noted softly. "I'm terrified," Madison admitted. She looked in the mirror. She looked like a queen. She felt like a target. "You survived the poison. You survived the forest. You survived the rogue attack," Marin said, turning Madison around to face her. "You are unbreakable, Luna." There was a knock at the door. "Enter," Madison commanded. The door opened, and Constantine stepped in. He stopped dead in his tracks. He was wearing his formal dress uniform, black military cut with gold braiding, a heavy velvet cape draped over one shoulder. He looked devastatingly handsome, dangerous. But when he looked at her, the danger melted away. His jaw went slack. "Leave us," he rasped to Marin, never taking his eyes off Madison. Marin bowed and slipped out. Constantine crossed the room in 3 strides. He didn't touch her at first. He just breathed her in, his eyes scanning every inch of her. "I almost canceled it," he confessed, his voice rough. "I almost told everyone to go home so I could lock you in the safe room until the end of time." "Why didn't you?" Madison asked. "Because hiding means they win," he said. He reached out, his fingers ghosting over her cheekbone. "And because I cannot wait another day to call you my wife." He kissed her, then slow, deep, and reverent. It tasted of desperation. "Whatever happens today," he whispered against her lips, "stay close to me. If the fighting starts, you shift and you run. Do not be a hero." "I won't leave you," she argued. "You will," he ordered, "because you are the future of this pack. I am just its shield." The great hall was full. Every pack member, every visiting dignitary, every potential enemy was there. Madison walked down the aisle. The music was swelling, beautiful and haunting. She saw faces she recognized, Elder Joran nodding respectfully, guards who had fought beside her. And at the front, near the altar, stood the inner circle. Mikhail was there, looking pale and sweaty, and next to him stood Dmitri. Dmitri, the war commander, Constantine's uncle, the man who had taught Constantine how to fight, an old wolf with a bad leg from the Great War. He leaned heavily on a cane. Click, drag, click. The sound of the cane on the stone floor hit Madison like a physical blow. Her heart stopped. Click, drag, click. The memory slammed into her brain sharp, clear, and terrifying. The laboratory, the blue light, the man pacing back and forth while she screamed. It wasn't a random scientist. It was him. Dmitri. Madison stumbled in the aisle. A gasp went through the crowd. Constantine stepped down from the altar, catching her arm. Madison. She gripped his forearm so hard her nails punctured the fabric. She looked at Dmitri. The old wolf was smiling at her, a grandfatherly, benevolent smile. But his intent was pure, rotting black. "It's him," Madison whispered, her voice trembling so hard she could barely speak. "Who?" Constantine asked, confused. "The man with the limp," she choked out. "The scientist. It's your uncle." Constantine froze. He looked at Dmitri. "Dmitri," Constantine said, his voice full of disbelief. "That's impossible. He's family." Dmitri's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold, dead cold. "Is something wrong, nephew?" Dmitri asked, his voice projecting easily through the silent hall. "Does the bride have cold feet?" Madison straightened up. She let go of Constantine's arm. She pulled the silver dagger from her thigh. The crowd screamed. Guards drew their swords. "You poisoned me," Madison said, her voice ringing out clear and furious. "For 10 years, you locked me in a room and broke my bones." Dmitri sighed, a long, disappointed sigh. "I tried to make you perfect, child," he said calmly. "Mikhail's daughter was too weak, too emotional. I tried to strip that away, to make a leader who felt nothing but duty." Mikhail's daughter. The words hung in the air. Konstantin whipped his head around to look at Mikhail. The beta was shaking, tears streaming down his face. "Is it true?" Konstantin roared. Mikhail collapsed to his knees. "I loved her mother," he wailed, "but she died. I couldn't look at the girl I gave her to Marcus to raise. Dmitri promised. He promised he would make her strong so she wouldn't die like her mother." "You monster!" Konstantin breathed. Dmitri tapped his cane on the floor. Click. "Enough melodrama," Dmitri stated. "The experiment failed, the subject is unstable, and the king is compromised by sentiment." He raised his hand. "Kill them both." Half the guards in the room, men loyal to the war commander. Men Madison had trusted turned their weapons on Konstantin and Madison. Chaos erupted. "Treason!" Konstantin bellowed. He shifted midair. Exploding out of his uniform, the midnight wolf landed on top of the nearest traitor, ripping his throat out. "Madison, run!" he roared in her mind. She didn't run. She shifted. The silver wolf burst from the wedding dress. She dove into the fray. It was a nightmare. Brother fighting brother, the wedding guests screaming and scrambling for the exits. Dmitri stood calmly by the altar, watching the slaughter like a game of chess. Madison fought her way toward him. She was a blur of silver teeth and claws. She took down a guard twice her size. She ducked under a sword swing. She lunged for Dmitri. But the old wolf was faster than he looked. He didn't shift. He simply sidestepped and swung his heavy cane. The silver handle cracked against Madison's skull. She went down hard, stars exploding in her vision. Dmitri stood over her, pressing the tip of the cane into her throat, cutting off her air. "Disappointing," Dmitri tutted. "All that potential, wasted on love." He raised the cane high, revealing a hidden blade in the tip. He was going to impale her. "No." A black shadow slammed into Dmitri. It was Konstantin. He hit his uncle with the force of a freight train. They rolled across the altar, smashing the ceremonial table. Konstantin didn't hold back. There was no family love left, only rage. He ripped into Dmitri with a savagery that terrified even the other wolves. Dmitri finally shifted a gray, mangy wolf, old but powerful. But he was no match for the alpha king in his prime, fueled by the threat to his mate. Konstantin pinned Dmitri to the ground. He locked his jaws around the old wolf's neck. He looked at Madison. He paused. He was waiting for her command, the third trial justice. Madison stood up on shaking legs. She shifted back to human form, naked and bloodied amidst the ruined wedding flowers. She looked at the man who had tortured her, the man who had twisted her father, the man who had tried to kill her love. "End it," she said coldly. Konstantin bit down, a sharp crunch. Dmitri went limp. The fighting in the hall stopped instantly, with their leader dead. The traitor guards dropped their weapons, surrendering to the loyalists. Silence fell, heavy, final. Konstantin shifted back. He walked over to Madison, ignoring the carnage around them. He picked up his heavy velvet cape from the floor and wrapped it around her shoulders. He pulled her into his chest. He was shaking. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair, over and over. "I've got you." Madison buried her face in his neck and finally, for the first time that day, she cried. The aftermath of a civil war is quiet. It is cleaning up glass. It is burying bodies. It is awkward silences at the dinner table. 1 week later, the castle was slowly returning to normal. The traitor guards were in the dungeon, awaiting trial. Mikhail was in a cell, too broken to even speak. He would likely be banished, sent to live out his days alone with his guilt. Madison sat on the balcony of the royal suite. It was a beautiful evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. She wasn't wearing a dress. She was wearing jeans and one of Constantine's shirts. She was the Luna now, unofficial, perhaps, since the ceremony hadn't finished, but no one dared question it, not after she had fought for them. The door opened. Constantine walked in. He carried 2 glasses of wine. He looked relaxed for the first time in months. The weight of the hidden threat was gone. "Thinking," he asked, handing her a glass. "About Mikhail," she said softly. "He's my father, biologically." Constantine sat down next to her. "Does that change anything?" "No," she shook her head. "Blood doesn't make a family. Constantine, love does. Sacrifice does. He sacrificed me to save himself from pain. That isn't a father." She looked at him. "You sacrificed everything for me. You fought your own family." "He wasn't family," Constantine said firmly. "He was a cancer." He took a sip of wine, watching her over the rim of the glass. "The council is asking when we want to reschedule the ceremony." Madison laughed a dry, tired sound. "Can we maybe just elope? No guests, no swords, just us and the moon." Constantine smiled. "Whatever you want, my love. You are the queen. I just follow orders." He set his glass down and pulled her into his lap. She curled into him naturally, fitting against his chest like a puzzle piece. "Marin says your tests came back," Constantine said, his voice dropping to a lower, more intimate register. "The neural pathways are healing, but the sensory gifts, they are permanent." "So I'll always be a freak," she teased lightly. "You will always be extraordinary," he corrected. He kissed the pulse point behind her ear. "You can sense things no one else can. You will be the greatest Luna this pack has ever seen. No one will ever be able to lie to you." "You can't lie to me either," she warned, poking his chest. "I have no desire to," he promised. "My life is yours. My thoughts are yours." He shifted. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a ring. It wasn't the massive ceremonial diamond from the failed wedding. It was a simple band of woven silver and black steel. "I had the blacksmith make this," he said, holding it up. "Silver for your wolf, iron for your will." Madison gasped. "It's beautiful." "Madison," Constantine said, looking deep into her eyes, "we don't need a priestess. We don't need a crowd. The moon is watching." He slid the ring onto her finger. "I, Constantine, Alpha of the Moonstone Pack, accept you as my mate, my equal, my heart." Tears pricked Madison's eyes. She placed her hand on his cheek. "I, Madison, accept you as my mate, my shield, my home." Constantine leaned in. The kiss started slow, tender, sealing the vow. But then the heat flared. The passion that had been building through fear, war, and pain finally exploded. He stood up, carrying her with him, her legs wrapping around his waist. He walked them into the bedroom, kicking the door shut behind them. Outside, the full moon shone down on the castle. The war was over. The shadows were gone. And inside, the silver wolf and the midnight wolf finally found their peace.